I'm Sam Rose, and you're tuning in to Commerce is Chaos, the podcast for consumer brand founders who know that building a business is messier than the highlight reel shows. Your supplier just missed their deadline, your top product is out of stock, and your competitor somehow launched the same thing at half the price. Sound familiar? Every week, we dive into the real problems that keep founders up at night, from inventory disasters to supply chain nightmares, because surviving the chaos is what separates brands that fail from brands that scale. Today, I'm talking to Suahn Hur, co-founder of Bari. Suahn looked at the mainstream U.S. baby food aisle, didn't see a single product built around how Asian families had been feeding their families for generations, and went back to Korea to build one from scratch. Well, I'm so excited to chat with you and get to know you. And thank you for coming
Likewise.
and making the time. I'd love to just start with where you started and what inspired you to start building a product, and maybe a little bit of the history that you had that brought you to where you are today, or at least gave you the gumption to go start something from scratch.
Yeah, for sure. So, but also excuse my voice. I was talking nonstop at the summer
Oh,
fancy, so
no.
my voice is a little wonky.
They need to have
Uh,
lozenges at the front door of summer fan.
exactly.
Like whoever is like doing the next CPG, Vicks
Yes.
rub
Yes.
thing,
At the
like
first front of the
yassified Vicks
door.
rub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So going back to kind of where I got my start. So, I started my career actually in consulting. I was a McKinsey consultant out of the Chicago office. I was doing consumer retail practice. And I think I had always had a thing for consumer CPG, like anything that is like real and tangible in real space, which is very, I guess, different from where the world was heading to like AI and like metaverse and all of these like online activities. But I always had a spot for things that are tangible, real, things I could feel and touch on a daily basis. So that's where I gravitated towards when I started my career. So
Mm.
I had, work across like grocery retailers to jeweler, fashion brands. That all was so fascinating to kind of see everything from like the product development to how you actually, touch base with consumer in real physical space. And so there was a moment, I pivoted to PNG actually when I moved back to Korea due to some like family and like visa issues. And that's where I got like really knee deep into like the operational role within the CPG company, as you can imagine. But at the time, like my sister, my co-founder, Subin, had her first child in the US, and she was told by a pediatrician that, it's not safe to feed her baby rice, which is, from someone with Asian heritage, it's like telling us like, do not drink water or something.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so naturally, like she and I were like looking into like why this was the case. And we found out a lot about the arsenic content in rice, especially grown in the US. And being in Asia and in like Korea, like we start to wonder like, and how are we doing it here? Like what is different? What makes rice unsafe or in different regions? So we actually started a lot more in like the R&D and like scientific research side of what makes rice unsafe, what makes any crop unsafe, and what kind of steps along the harvest to packaging could, potentially make worse a product for in terms of safety. So that's how that's the kind of questions that we started, toying with in the beginning. And, my co-founder sister, Subin, did not have anything related to PG or retail background. But, as a mother, she had a very strong kind of mission to change that situation around. So I think she was the first person that, I was the first person she tapped on to say, hey, do you want to actually start something, fix this sort of safer baby food supply chain issue, starting with rice, which is the grain that, we grew up on and
Yeah.
continue to want the babies, and parents to feel confident eating in the States where the rice is not as safe compared to Korean rice. So that's kind of how we got our very first start. And, across our passion for different cultures and food to dabbling with the food science and like agriculture science behind the safety of different food items. Like I think we've evolved many ways, but the first thing we, set out to do is solve the baby food industry one step at a time. So that is the background of how we got our start.
I find that so interesting because you didn't, so many brands start, and not that there's anything wrong with this, but I think the common path is to start with like a product or a problem that you're
Mm-hmm.
obsessed with. And you've started with a problem that you're obsessed with, but it precedes the product itself. It's a supply chain problem
Right, right,
and a safety problem. And then
right.
out of that is coming like, have to imagine a lot of flexibility in the future for how you want to approach product development.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, that's a really great point. I think as you said, we didn't start with a pointed product that we want to go after. We knew there was a gap in food safety of babies, especially surrounding rice. And then also in the process, of course, there's not a lot of Asian flavored or diverse flavored baby food. So that was like the second problem that we did discover from the process. But I think there was a bigger, very broad issue of food systems that we were kind of discovering through the lens of baby food from the first-hand experience of raising a baby.
Yeah.
And so that's how we got our start. And then I think from there, we thought about like how to actually go to market with the problem. And then that's where we, I think, dabbled to the next phase of what is the right product to solve this problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And you moved back to Korea to build this supply chain in part. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So I was already back in Korea, and then my sister at the time was on maternity leave with her like first baby. So then she packed up her things, moved back with her husband, her firstborn that was less than a year old actually. And then we started meeting manufacturers, meeting the Rice Federation folks from South Korea. We met with folks at Seoul National University, which is like the top university in Korea, and met with their food and nutrition team to understand how to better understand it really. Being Korean, we actually grew up across like Singapore and also went to college in the States too. So I would say as adults, we didn't have a lot of footprint or connections in Korea. So it was like starting off fresh in a new country. That was like a learning cycle, I think, on its own.
Okay, so I'd love to hear sort of, sometimes building a supply chain is a very physical, very experiential thing. Like you end up traveling to discover where your products or where your raw materials are going to come from. And I would just love to hear your story of like meeting some of these farmers and learning about, what goes into making their product and how maybe I don't even know, maybe they're like, is it regulatory or is it convenience? Like what is sort of differentiating the quality of rice coming from one location versus the rice that you found in the US that sort of wasn't there from a qualitative perspective, and what did it feel like to like be at the farms to kind of discover that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one kind of context to start with when it comes to rice quality and safety is, so rice has a tendency to actually absorb heavy metals in its environment because it is soaked in water for majority of its time. It soaks up to even 10 times greater of the contaminants or nutrition from its environment. So as a result, where it's grown and how regulated the soil quality and environmental pollution is a big factor in how safe the rice is. So in the US, agriculture is very at mass scale, a lot of automation, and they're grown in like acres of land, hectares of land. But contrary to that, South Korean agriculture is very manual still and very small scale, generational owners at small scale. So because of that also leads to a lot of quality control by different farms versus when it's on a mass scale, there's not a lot of quality control and tweaks you can do. Plus, I would say Korean laws also about environmental pollution or leakages are a lot stricter. I would say in the US, there are tendencies where you have a spillage, you pay the fees, and then you're kind of done with it. But in Korea, there are stricter laws about waste control from industrial waste that prevent you from even leaking it from the first place, if that makes sense. So I would say the soil quality overall is safer, and then the small-scale farming allows us to tweak the quality and choose different farmers depending on the tested levels by different regions where the rice is harvested.
That is so interesting. And do you feel like some of those practices are likely to come over to the United States at some point, or is it kind of like I don't want to give the wrong label to it, but it's rice is so culturally important in Korea that I have to imagine like there's a lot of focus on making sure that there's enough and it's the right rice, as opposed to it being sort of less of a pantry staple or a core pantry staple in the US. But how do you feel about that kind of like those good practices making their way over?
Yeah. If any practice were to spill over borders, it may be more of the sense that like automation comes over to Korea, because actually any agriculture crops in Korea, prices are a lot higher in the US. So even if you were to make the same pouch that with the same recipe and same percentage, it would actually cost a lot more to make it here in Korea because it's not automated. Therefore, the crop prices incorporates a lot of the manual labor that goes into making them. So if Korean agriculture were to move one way, it would adopt more of the automation. I think it would be harder to undo the automated and lower prices that's already adopted in the US in the reverse. So that's kind of how I see that moving. And then in terms of rice being an important crop in South Korea, absolutely. It is a supply that is controlled very tightly by the Korean government. And the research around the rice, different breeds of rice with different nutritional content or purpose is directed by the federal South Korean government. So a lot of the research about, this kind of rice, like even within the same white rice, there's 300 different breeds. I don't know if you know about this, but that's how many breeds there are registered in South Korea. So they may have different benefits like, this one's more dry, so it may be fit for baking if you were making into a flour format. This one has a lot more, say, protein content than some of the other ones that were grown naturally. So there's a lot of research and supply control done by the South Korean government. So in order for us to actually get our rice competitively in price and also to get the quality of rice that we want, we had to get a lot of our foot in the door with the agricultural ministry and the government supply chain to make sure that we can lock in some good pricing and the volume also sustainably as we were growing our production too, which was a very new experience for us as well.
Yeah. But I want to talk about compliance, but before I do, because we could end up there for a while, I'd love to hear about discovery for these 240 different varietals of just white rice, which have different characteristics. Is there like a database of rices that you can go to and you can be like, I want one with this much protein content and this much, gluten and, or it's so not gluten, but,
other
glutinous rice and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so there is a branch within our Ministry of Agriculture, and they oversee the farmers associations for different crops. And then for rice, there's obviously a co-op of all the rice farmers plus the research done on different breeds of rice. And we have a strong outlook of how rice is best used. Export trends are growing, then we may want to use this particular rice versus other different scents. Based on that, there's more government mandated research on we want to strongly develop this benefit or this nutritional value within rice. So the natural breeding experiments they would do. And it's not publicly available if you were to use AI to Google it. But I think once you get some foot in the door within the network of rice supply, you can access a little more about what is available, what are protected breeds, how can you source the right farmers to get this sort of situation.
And then from there's of course now I will do compliance.
Okay.
But I promise we'll talk about funding, like brand.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to talk about everything. This is like my life now, so yeah.
Rice is my life.
Yeah.
It's a quote from Frozen. It's ice is my life, but anyway, okay, I'm just a mom dork. This is what happens when your kids make you watch the same movie over and over again. I'm just a soundboard for Disney. So you're sourcing in Korea. You still have to go through, of course, like a bunch of US regulation. It sounds like the quality coming from Korea, it makes that a lot easier, right? Because they've already raised the bar. But then there's a handful of things: ISO certifications, FDA registration,
absolutely,
and heavy metal testing. What was the most surprising discovery for you in that transition of kind of like building the supply chain? And the supply chain that you're building is an answer to the lack of acceptable to you regulatory controls in the market that you want to sell in. But then of course you still have to jump through their hoops. Was there anything that was like, novel or like a surprising discovery that came for you out of kind of like getting smart on that compliance piece of it and ultimately getting your product made?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, we had to jump through the hurdles two ways, where one side is the safety of the ingredients and the one side is actually, can we distribute this legally? So while we talk about the first side, I think going back to your question, so one other context about Korean manufacturing and agriculture is that Korea is very dependent on export historically, even from post-Korean War 1950s. Our bedrock of economic growth has been export. Obviously, like with Samsung and the ships, the more infrastructure and electronic products, we have always been a country that is rooted in exports. A lot of the manufacturing facilities and co-mans that we've talked to, it was a mixed bag of people that are really ready and eager to go grow their export business versus the more, I guess, conservative and not very growth oriented, but just stable manufacturers that were a little reluctant to go that extra mile. So I think when we were scoping our co-mans and developing our products and what is the right product we can go with, a lot of the filters we had to put on was who was already like export ready in terms of the certifications you mentioned with the global standards, FDA registered facilities, and all of the paperwork that were involved in it. And then on top of that, some of the product groups, none of the manufacturers we could find were compliant, right? And in that case, we had to make a pitch for what our vision is, what products we want to bring to the market, and how much, volume we could potentially expect. All of that business case you might make to an investor, we had to make it to the manufacturers themselves as well, because getting these certifications and changing even some of their, manufacturing lines just to fit different standards is a big investment for them that they don't want to commit to unless they could predict some volume and growth thereof. So I think that process was, as much as we were trying to convince the market and maybe some investors along the way, we also had to get the supply chain on board with our vision. So I think it was truly selling our vision left and right, like up and down the supply chain on how this is going to change how baby food market is improved with our vision and with the rice-based products that we can bring from South Korea. And I think we're still in the process of convincing one of our co-mans to almost co-invest in this vision and getting the additional certifications and whatnot. But we're very excited that we did find some that are excited on board with our vision, and they're very excited to grow with us. And I think that's the exact relationship you want to have with your partners, like not just a transactional one-way street, but like truly you grow, so we grow, and that's why we're in this together.
All right. Well, you've answered all my hard questions, so now we get to go to the bus.
I passed the test.
It's really interesting though, and I'm sure we'll come back to it and touch on it more at some point. I'd love to hear some thoughts about the positioning of the business, and before we get too deep into it, tell us about the name and where Bari comes from.
So some people think about, there is a region in Italy called Bari in like the Puglia province. So we have nothing to do with them actually, but we think about going there for an offsite one day. But Bari, it is originated from a Korean phrase called Bari. It's like the expression or idiom that describes the way, when you go to your grandma's house, like she overstuffs you, giving you snacks every 30 minutes, like, are you hungry yet? And then she brings out the next thing. The way you will be packing your child's lunch with all the different snacks, make sure that they get the protein, the juices. So it describes a way in like a very parental feeling to like overpacking your children with the good stuff. So that's the spirit we want to embody with our products. We just want to give them all the best and a lot more. Yeah.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. And now tell me a little bit about, so you sort of, intentionally positioned this as Asian baby food, or America's first Asian baby food brand. And what I love about that, because a thing that's difficult to do in a crowded market is to differentiate yourself enough, or like in software land, we're always like, well, what's the wedge, and like, how are we narrowing the offer enough so that we can target like a very specific user with a very specific concern or problem or perspective, because then you can kind of like widen up the scope from there.
Absolutely.
So although I know it's a reflection of your heritage and the genesis of the products themselves and even down to the name, I also think it's just a brilliant marketing to be like, it's for this. And if you want to, identify with that, like, welcome to our party. Cards on the table. Your tech stack is held together with duct tape and prayers. If you're a brand founder or COO juggling Shopify, your 3PL portal, 3 different inventory trackers, and yes, that one crucial Google Sheet, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Orders get lost, inventory counts are fiction, and your seamless integrations break every other Tuesday. Endless Commerce changes the game. One platform for everything. DTC, wholesale, marketplaces, the works. AI-powered forecasting, real-time inventory visibility, and integrations that actually integrate. Teams like Great Jones, Food 52, and Pattern Brands already made the switch. Ready to ditch the chaos? Visit endlesscommerce.com, mention Commerce is Chaos when you reach out, and get 3 months free. Because your ops stack should be your competitive advantage, not your biggest headache.
Yeah, exactly. It is very specific, and we use some like strong words like first, and then we also narrow it pretty strongly down to like Asian. But then I think that was like kind of like a bet we were making because I think this brand, even 5 years ago, would not have worked because of the Asian label, to be quite frank. I think we were in a very different state in like how Asian food and Korean food were perceived. And that now it's become sort of like the hallmark of wellness and premium, and identity. But like, I don't think the timing couldn't have been better with this branding. That's why we went the bet that even if we do kind of narrow it down to like a Asian segment, it's not going to limit us to just the Asian consumers, which is what we have confirmed as we are, continuing to grow our brand. So that was like a big bet that thankfully paying off.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And you're right. I mean, timing is everything in go to market. And if you present something that sort of doesn't create the right intrinsic associations or assumptions about what's being sold, it can be misperceived. And I love that you took that brave step to narrow it down to like this hyper narrow positioning, even though
Hmm.
you know that sort of implies things to people who are like slightly adjacent to that
Yeah.
positioning. And then of course, like, does it close you off from opening it up in the future?
Hmm.
And it sounds to me like from what you're saying, that the customer is very multicultural, and
Yes.
is tell me a little bit about your just customer segmentation and who you find is
Hmm.
responding most strongly to the
Yeah.
brand.
I think regionally speaking, we have actually traction from a lot of the coastal regions, which is what we assumed. Obviously, the first layer of our consumers are the largest like Asian population that tend to be bi-coastal. But I think beyond that, when we do like our D2C analyses, it's not just the Asian segments. We have a lot of residents from multicultural households, which I don't know if you know, but in the Gen Alpha generation, it's the first time that the majority is not white actually, it's the
Yeah.
multicultural segment. So I think even households that are growing up with more diverse peers and like people exposed to social media to different cuisines, that opens up parents' willingness to try different flavors and different
Yeah.
ingredients from way back when. And I think another appeal that we have to just like everyone is that we are introducing savory taste to the baby food market, not just puree formats of simple fruits and veggies. So I think that is something that really resonates to like a broader segment that, when I was at Summer Fancy just now, like a lot of parents that are not even our buyers or anything would stop by and be like, this is what I would have wanted to feed my kids.
Yeah.
Like, this is the problem I want to solve beyond just the sugary palette that they're like now obsessed with. So I
Yeah.
think through that consistent communication of like our messaging beyond just using rice as the core ingredient and having Asian flavors, the diversity of flavors in itself, I think, resonates further beyond the Asian segments.
Yeah. Yeah. I was always on the hunt for my kids are a little bit older now.
Yeah.
But
How old are
uh,
they now?
they're 13, 11, and 9.
Okay.
But I got one who definitely in for the porridge.
Okay.
Right. Well, they're all very adventurous. And but also but the my middle son Oliver likes
Hmm.
to try anything that is like surprising or interesting
Oh,
or
nice.
and so
Uh-huh.
like he would be the first to go for if there was baby food in front of him, he'd be like, "I'm gonna be a baby again."
Oh my gosh.
Like, I'm gonna
That's great. You did a
I
great
was
job
like,
raising him with the diverse palette, I see.
well, it's either that or he just likes to make a scene. So I'm not trying to take credit for
Oh.
it. But yeah, he loves going back to like the baby
Hmm.
foods of his childhood. But at the time
Mm.
there were fewer options for like savory foods, and I was always looking for something like that where it was just
Yeah.
like, you know, trying not to give them yet another thing with banana in it.
Hmm.
And I really admire the additional step of taking these like, I mean, there's savory and then there's like curry savory,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
I think adds it's not just on the sweetness or savoriness scale, but it adds umami, it adds
Hmm.
spice, it adds
Spice.
like complexity and
Hmm.
nuance. And I think that training young palates to appreciate complex flavors is like something that we really need to be doing. Like it was bringing
Yeah,
beyond chicken
absolutely.
fingers, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just like, oh, like I want my kids to like more diverse things. It actually has scientifically proven, correlation to lifelong health because
Exactly.
more diverse textures and ingredients can stimulate your baby's brain. So it actually helps with like cognitive development growth as well. And of course, healthier eating habits has implied, ties with the way you eat and other lifestyle diseases or chronic disease that you may develop later down the road. So it really is setting them up for lifelong health from the first step onwards.
I think another thing I really have been interested about your
Mm-hmm.
product line is that you're introducing tea for kids, which
Yes.
again, this is like just chalk it up to my lack of education, but that is like such a cool. I don't think I've seen a kid focused tea
Mm-hmm.
product anywhere ever, other than
Yeah.
maybe like sweet boba.
Mm-hmm.
But like, tell me a little bit more about what brought you to wanting to productize that.
Yeah.
Maybe how your customers have responded. I find it completely awesome.
Oh, thanks.
And my children
Mm-hmm.
love tea, but I'm always looking for something that's not caffeinated for them,
Yeah.
but that
Yeah.
has kind of these interesting kind of savory tea flavors, and that's just not like a a chamomile or a mint or something that's just
Mm-hmm.
purely herbal.
Yeah. Um, but tea is like a very interesting thing because when you think of tea, I think most people think of leafy teas, which is associated with caffeine, and then you've got the herbal, like fruity teas that grew a lot in the Western Hemisphere. There is a subclass of tea, I would say, that is particularly enjoyed in Korea and some Japanese cultures,
Yeah,
where it's not leafy, it's not like fruit or dried herbs, but like true just roasted grains, and that's just steeped in water to give it more flavor. And in a lot of households and restaurants you go to, they serve them just chilled as a water substitute, like on the go. And if you go to convenience stores in Korea, we don't have a lot of sugary drinks, but a lot of options for not like naturally unsweetened, like flavored watered with the roasted corn tea, corn silk,
yeah,
other like beans, dried roasted beans, sort of those things. And the diversity of those flavored caffeine-free tea is so wide. Like there's, I think, like 20 varieties I can think on top of my head. And while we were developing our products for the US market, obviously we've noticed the lack of Asian flavors in the pouches and the ready-to-eat meal formats. But in the beverages, there's so many juices and dairy-filled like smoothies and
yeah.
whatnot. But I think that that's a problem of like introducing too much sugar up front in their life, which we cared a lot about in terms of building a lifelong health from the get-go. So we wanted to incorporate that tea culture, which is associated with caffeine, but like we introduce it in caffeine-free, baby-friendly format. So that's how we came up with the teas. And I think it takes a little more consumer education because, as you said, it's associated with caffeine and it takes a
Yeah.
couple more explanation for people to understand, like, is it safe for babies? But I think once you hear it, when we bring it to buyers and they sample it, they're like, oh yeah, I don't buy my kids juices because they're even naturally high in sugar. But this is exactly, what I'm looking for, what I would love to give them. That's still interesting, more interesting than water, but it's
Yeah.
not sugary and something they can't have too much of. So it's just a great way to stay hydrated with a little bit more fun and some functional benefit also, given that they're actual grains and beans and other vegetables that are dried and roasted.
Tell me a little bit about the product development process, and happy to linger on tea,
Uh-huh.
or whichever of your products has been the most
Yeah.
interesting for you to develop.
Mm.
You start with supply chain. What happens next?
Yeah, so I think we narrowed down the product categories that we want to go into. So we first started out with the very pure rice porridges that are currently available on our Amazon, plus the teas because I think they're just easier to introduce as Asian profile like products. And then
Oh,
from there on, we moved on to a little more complex, the pouch lines, like ready to eat meal formats that are just along the way actually. So we will be launching 4 new flavors in August that include kabocha porridge. We got the seaweed soup, the shrimp porridge.
yeah,
Yeah. We just wanted to experiment with what kind of iconic Asian dishes could be translated into
yeah.
baby friendly format and textures and flavors. So at first, quite frankly, we just sat down one day. We're like, let's list out our favorite dishes, right? that could be translated to porridge format because that's the texture that we would eventually go for.
Yeah.
Porridge itself is a category of food on its own in Korea, where it's for people that are sick. It's for when you can't really digest much, but you want to get nutrition dense food. So naturally, we just thought about like what flavors of porridge we love, what could be, translated into porridge. So we started listing out the dishes, and then together with our manufacturer plus our team at the food and nutrition department at Seoul National University, what are ingredients that we should consider, what are optimal for the stages that we're solving for, and then can we achieve this texture. So it was a three-way street of what the market could work with, what our manufacturer lines could work with, and then nutritionally and scientifically, what would be optimal for babies to have at that stage that we're targeting to bring this to. So it was months long of going back with the samples, with the recipe, like combinations, and like, getting just taste testing ourselves with our babies, nieces, family, friends, and their babies, what actually could work and babies actually like to eat.
And are there parts of so there's the ingredients piece of the supply chain, then of course there's like packaging and fill and co-manufacturers and tell us a little bit about that part of the product development process with ideating packaging and figuring out, pouches as a format are great because they're sort of resolved, right? Like if you want to make something that comes in a pouch, there's a reliable supply chain for that, and you don't have to bear the cost of innovating that format. You can focus on innovating basically the design and and the contents of it. But was there something about the product design process of maybe what that pouch looks like, or what were you communicating on it that you guys spent a little bit of extra time on?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about something that we focused on, plus a problem that we faced that was very unique to us. So first, I think on the packaging material, packaging format wise, I think the pouches were a no-brainer option for us, given it's such a popular format in the US. And if we're introducing so many things to the market, we want some of the things to remain familiar and then some of the things to be new. So since our flavors are so new, textures are new, we want to have the pouches to be obviously the way we would go about. We consider other options like those vacuum sealed cups, where you open and eat right away. And it's kind of like the instant rice format if you are familiar with those. But I think the pouches were the no-brainer given what is popular and arrives well with our consumers.
Yeah.
But in terms of the material, right? So we go through a retort process where, after the pouches are filled and sealed, they go through heat and pressure. And we noticed that, talking to different manufacturers and packaging, like the existing baby pouches have a lot of aluminum lining in them for obvious reasons like shelf life extension, and obviously saving them inventory costs and whatnot. But we also know that what brands usually recommend to consumers is you can heat them up, you can put them in the microwave, although they're aluminum lined, which is a big safety problem that we discovered that was not being addressed in the market. Because any level of metal in the packaging could seep into the actual food. And we didn't want to compromise any of that, given that we started with the mission to solve, obviously, food safety. So we had to do a bit of more research into what kind of material could work in a pouch format, but that still could be deemed as foil-free, metal-free. So it is a costlier option that we have to go for. And mind you, as a startup, choosing a pricier option is not an easy choice, but I think we had to just go back to the mission that we started with, the problem that we want to solve, and the number one value, even beyond the whole cultural diversity and Asian heritage, is food safety for us. And so we got the samples, we felt them, we tested in the microwave, we put food in them, and we did all of the testing after using different materials to see what actually comes out in the final food after microwaving, how consumers would actually use our product to make sure that, the final end result is what we were happy with, satisfied with. So that's one of the options that we had to, that's one of the choices we intentionally made with our packaging. And that's something that also resonates really well with our retail buyers, that, you should add that call out in the packaging because that is truly something different from potentially other pouches that may be using aluminum lining. And that is one additional, design choice we did make. Now, on the problem side, right? So these pouches, at least like the, say, the material and the sizing was not entirely custom. So it wasn't like we had to do millions of orders or anything. So on the volume side, it was fairly okay. But then there was the war going on in the Middle East that blocked the oil supply chain, and that bumped us like our packaging order like timing as well as the pricing shock for like almost 3 to 4 months. So that
Wow.
was a huge headache for us because we want to get the product out, the sample out to bring to buyers and also bring to the show. But then they were suddenly facing like 30% shock in price as well as 2 months delay to even get the raw material to make the pouches.
Right.
So that was another like chaos for us in terms of how are we navigating our product launches and the communication we have with buyers. How would we secure this for, future production runs? Because this
Yeah.
kind of shock obviously could happen any time again. And so I think we just have a calibrated mind of like what is like the maximum delay, what are the shocks,
Yeah.
what is implication of these kind of supply shocks on our future supply chain. So thankfully we are not in stores yet, so this doesn't affect us too badly. It just
Right.
delayed our product launch timing. But when we do go into more stable like demand and more retail stores, this kind of helped us ground us in like, wow, this is the kind of things that could go wrong that we don't foresee particularly. So I think it helped us ground us in the worst end of the spectrum and the chaos of
Yeah.
commerce. Yeah.
It I love that you're saying that. And then also I'm being reminded of your
Mm-hmm.
background in consulting and your sister's
Yeah.
quantitative background. I'm like, if there's anyone who can model how to like
Yeah.
solve this problem in the product, it's probably a McKinsey
Yeah.
analyst.
Yeah, that helped. That helped. We have a bunch of models running in the background on forecasting and how frequently we'll have to order, how far in advance we have to plan for things. So I think going through these like trial and error and random supply shocks, I think only help us have a more robust space for when we
Yeah.
do expand further down the road, like to be prepared for that, I think. And then it sets us a more realistic expectation of what could go wrong. So in the end, it was helpful, but in the moment, we're like, oh no, 3 months.
3 months feels
We
like
need to,
infinity, doesn't
I
it, in a
know, it
product
really
launch?
does.
Yeah.
It really does. Yeah.
Um, how much experience did you have with demand planning and forecasting before you had to do it for your own business?
I think honestly, in my consulting background as well as the experience in P&G, I think it definitely wasn't enough to run my own business, to be quite honest with you. I think it's a different monster because even within different category, even within the same CPG or retail, different categories move so differently. And so learning how the baby market moves, grounding in the velocity expectations and the production cycles, like product development cycles, like that was honestly it's kind of learning everything anew. I had
Yeah.
some knowledge on other consumer products like non-food, but I think for me, doing food from the scratch was like learning. It was a new job, I think. But I was equipped with the toolkit and like frameworks, but I had to do a lot of trial and error from like doing our own production runs and just scoping more data from the baby food market through even buying data sets or getting data sets from an industry friend I made, right? Like those
Yeah.
things all feed into better calibrating our internal benchmarks and models.
It's such a killer capability I know so many founders that are very creatively oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was one thing I could have wished for my former self as a young
Yeah.
operator, or share with, future operators or about to be operators or
Mm-hmm.
founders, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
just get comfortable with a little bit of modeling, because even if
Yeah.
you do at the level of arithmetic and napkin math, which is
Yeah.
acceptable,
Yeah.
it helps you make such better calibrated decisions about the business, and it shouldn't be
Absolutely.
something that is like
An afterthought, right?
an
Yeah.
afterthought. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. We had this is like kind of confidential, but we are going into some national chains next year.
Yeah,
And
congrats.
thank you so much. And even with that, before preparing for the meeting, we got like a month notice of, oh, this is your line review. And even for that, we had to look up even quick back of the envelope map of how many stores could we target, how many
Right.
products we go into, what would be our velocity. And then that already spits out like a range of number that we need to commit to in terms of our manufacturing costs. And then additionally, trade funds, promo funds, and then probably other external and marketing investment. We're like, oh, wow, this is a huge deal. Like
Yeah.
that kind of sense checking numbers was something me and my sister were both very used to. So I think that honestly, even as an early brand, gave a lot of our partners credibility because we have that kind of muscle of having those numbers in our head, calculating that in advance as opposed to just be like brand driven and only just creative driven for sure.
How deep into the supply chain management piece of it do you get? You are buying your raw materials direct from the producer, right? Or is your co-man helping out with that part of it?
So we source some of it ourselves, like for specifically rice as our core ingredient. We struck a deal with the Korean government, like directly. So we get it at a certain rate, a certain volume. Yeah, it's like, ooh, government deal, love it. I mean, as I said, like Korean government, Korean economy is so rooted in exports. So I think even though we are a very young startup, because we have some traction, very strong traction going international and have benchmarks like Amazon's best-selling SKUs. All of those helped us build the credibility for like, okay, these girls can get some rice at good price. So yeah, we struck a deal, thankfully. And then so that helps us manage some of our actual COGS with our manufacturer better because we kind of help them in like a big part of their production, ingredient sourcing. And so we're very like deeply integrated with the supply chain, both on the ingredients as well as working with co-mans on the other ingredient level too.
And how do you model that, just like broad strokes? But if someone's sort of looking at this and maybe a little bit intimidated or just curious, like well-oriented, but curious about how they can kind of model this multifaceted supply chain and, taking raw materials and turning them into a finished good or a component of manufacturing. Is there like a go-to Excel model that you use or another tool that you found like particularly helpful in kind of going from 0 to 1 on that piece of it?
Yeah, I think starting out, Excel is your best friend, I think. I think spending like money on software before you know what the processes are could be even more complicating to you than like trying out building it on an Excel. And nowadays we use AI aggressively in our company. And so using our tools as our friend to back test or like stress it with different variables on like if this ingredient changes by this much, like what would that mean for our margins, for like actual COGS, etc. So I think just for me particularly, I just like to have visibility on everything that goes into a product, everything from ingredient level that feeds into the actual COGS of the product. And then for us, logistics is a big piece because we not only have the US domestic transportation, but also the ocean freight and the tariffs and all of those components. So I like to keep a very long Excel of per product. What are the line items that feed into the cost? And then also what is the percentage of our margin that is going into each of the component, right? Like the actual product versus the packaging versus the tariffs versus the logistics, ocean freight, all of those cost items just need to be visible, I think. And if something flags higher than other product groups, then you start to wonder, like, is there a way to bring our product proportion down? Packaging proportion down for this product, or like you just need to understand why the numbers are that way by either figuring out with your manufacturers, like understanding the cost breakdown. I'm a big believer of you need to know what you don't know in order to succeed versus knowing everything. So I think that's kind of what I do with my limited experience in CPG so far, just having everything in one place and flagging the irregularities across your products is really great to manage your cost and understand your cost.
I feel like landed cost of goods is one of those things where like when you get to a place where you can resolve that number that, you're confident in, it's such a signal for like, okay, I've got control of my inputs.
Yes.
I can also control a lot of the outputs from that and like make decisions around like what my cost to a retailer should be, what my lowest acceptable margin is, what my what my higher optimal margin is, and all of that. And it's like I don't know if it's an unsung hero of
it feels very calm when you're like, I got it all mapped, I got it in one place. Like that's a good place to be before you really scale. Like you want to know what your numbers are and what are the leverage you can pull to push the numbers around. And for us, I don't think we would have done that this quickly had we not had a retail meeting, set up from such early stage. But when we were just doing D2C in the very beginning of our launch, we were just kind of like, yay, like we're selling, but then like, oh, we're going to retail. We actually need to get down and understand the cost.
You got to get your stuff together.
Exactly. Because you have to know what price you're going to give them. What is the acceptable, as you said, like price that you're willing to go down and negotiate. And then also like we need to fix our prices because, the oil shock, things like that can't we can't have a lot of surprises when we go into retail. So we
Yeah.
even had conversation with our packaging and our actual food manufacturers on what is the price they're comfortable locking in as the maximum for the next year and a half. So we were
Yeah.
able to bring that actually to our retailer, which I think was a very big impressive piece for them as a, once again, startup to have that level of thinking and foresight into what kind of stability we can
Yeah.
provide and bring to the table.
And, I think so often,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of negotiating with a retail buyer inherits a bunch of things that I think we're either like told or just we learn through synthesis about negotiation in general, which is that like information asymmetry is the
Mm.
name of the game, and you have to hide things from each other in order to get what you want.
Yeah.
And I feel like the total opposite is true in the retail conversation. Like, the more they can know my margin and I can know their targets, the better we can kind of squeeze each other or
Yeah.
collaborate. Because
Yeah.
at some point, if they know what my landed cost of goods, if I feel comfortable sharing or disclosing that information, which is, I'm not saying that you need to be comfortable doing that,
Mm-hmm.
but we were. And then we'd start to say, look, we're making 17 cents here. So like,
Yeah.
as much as I want to give you the
Yeah.
cost break that you're asking for, like, I don't have the margin for it. But what I
Mm-hmm.
can do is, if you're willing to place an order for 10,000 units, I can go back to my supplier and negotiate. And
Yeah.
that's where growth came from. And it was so awesome
Mm.
because the second that I got comfortable with the type of negotiation where I wasn't like imposing that information asymmetry
Yeah.
on myself,
Yeah.
the better. I mean, my business grew because
Yeah.
I got the 10,000 unit. They were like, okay, well, we could do that. And then we went back to the supplier, and then we made 23 cents.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think I learned that it was always told to me in consulting and like big corporate that if you have to win together with your supply chain, your partner, your selling partners, your vendors, like you have to succeed together to, grow. I was always told that, but I don't think I truly felt it on my skin until I entered my own business. Because just like you mentioned, being more transparent about volume expectations, what can we do together if we go to a new retailer? What could you possibly bring to the table? What's the lowest you could go with us to grow this volume? I think that was a very candid conversation that I think I wasn't expecting to have. But then when we did that, it actually unlocked, as you said, a lot more room for margin cushion and like also growth potential because now we could push out more volume at a more comfortable like cash flow. So yeah, I think the information symmetry is truly
There
the win. Yeah.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the other place I felt that always created a lot of, just business horsepower for us was back to the cost of goods conversation. Like, I always kept a breakdown, and I would always
Mm-hmm.
ask our suppliers to give us a breakdown of like each of the components of cost, which
Yes.
I think in CPG is maybe more common than in like
Yeah.
consumer durables.
Yeah.
But if I had, a widget and its packaging, sometimes my supplier would just be like, okay, that's $1.50. But well, wait, what component of cost is that packaging itself? Because then I can have the conversation of, well, actually, out of that $1.50, like if 27 cents is going to the packaging, like maybe I need to use a different substrate, or maybe I
Yeah.
need to plan for a different kind of ink or a different print
Mm.
process or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. But that also allowed me to kind of, engineer up flexibly if I wanted to, of like, well, for this product, I want to create a more premium buying experience because I have more overall,
Mm-hmm.
pricing power on it. And
Yeah.
so I feel like creating a relationship where you are asking your suppliers to meet you where you want to be, but
Mm-hmm.
also maybe giving them the framework for how you think about your total cost of goods and how your bill of materials stacks up,
Yeah.
allows you to make those very incremental, like teeny tiny, like micro adjustment decisions
Yeah.
around what is going into the product, so that like if you need to get the metal lining out of the plastic, but that's
Exactly.
going to like increase your costs. If they only ever just gave you the final cost of the thing, you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to make that calculus as knowledgeably.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the beginning of our stages, I think we were a little careful about sharing our sort of goals too deeply. It felt like we were spilling some trade secrets and whatnot. But like at the end of the day, like if they succeed, we succeed, and vice versa. So I think like we were also very like growing more transparently as we were talking to different suppliers for a longer period. Like, hey, we need to like leave X% margin when we go to retailer. That leaves us with this much squeeze. Is there any way you can work around it? That kind of conversation, I think we were more starting to be comfortable to start having like the longer we were talking with them, these different manufacturers. So like I completely agree with your point.
Information symmetry for the win.
Yes, that's the takeaway. That's the subtitle of this episode.
The title of the episode is Information Symmetry.
Transparency. Even to consumers, just let them know. I mean, there are brands who do that, right? Like their whole thing is like, this is our literal margin to you. This is why we bring value. So like it is, when done right, the right choice.
Yeah. Thank you for being so generous with your knowledge and allowing us to have a little bit more symmetry with the information that's inside your head.
No, I love sharing my knowledge. I love
learning about the brand, and I wish I had little ones, but I have nieces and nephews, so I will be evangelizing in our household, and I can only assume the same of a bunch of people listening. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sam. It was so nice talking to you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Commerce is Chaos. If you're listening, I have a feeling you know just how much good leaving a 5-star review can do for a team. Drop us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Commerce is Chaos wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to our Substack, also called Commerce is Chaos, for more good stuff and actionable tools to build your business.